The morning of my college graduation, I stood alone in the parking lot of the Civic Center in Columbus, Ohio, holding my cap and gown in a dry cleaning bag, watching other families pour out of minivans and SUVs with flowers and cameras and noise. A mother was crying already, dabbing her eyes before the ceremony even started. A father was straightening his son's tassel, laughing about something, his hand resting on the back of his kid's neck the way fathers do when they're proud and they want you to feel it. I looked at my phone. No messages. I had sent the details 3 weeks earlier. The date, the time, the address, the parking information. I had even included the name of the section where my seats were reserved. 4 tickets, because I thought maybe my mother, my father, my brother Marcus, and my aunt would all come. I had asked, I had planned, I had saved those 4 tickets for 2 months. I put my phone in my bag, zipped it shut, and walked inside alone. My name is Claire. I was 24 years old that morning, the first person in my family to earn a 4-year degree, and I crossed that stage by myself while the families in the stands cheered for other people's children. I want to tell you how I got there, and what happened after, because the graduation was not even close to the hardest part. My father's name is Richard, and the most important thing you need to understand about him is that he has never once in his life admitted he was wrong about anything. Not to my mother, not to my brother, and certainly not to me. He grew up in a small town outside of Dayton, the oldest son of a man who believed that discipline was the same thing as love. And somewhere along the way, he decided that was true. He ran our house like a schedule. Dinner at 6. Lights out at 9:30 until we were in high school. No sleepovers, no school trips, no boyfriends until he personally interviewed them at the kitchen table, which he did with the energy of a man conducting a job interview for a position he had already decided to reject. My mother went along with all of it. She is not a cruel person, I want to be clear about that. But she has spent 30 years choosing peace over truth, and after a while, those choices become their own kind of cruelty. She would smooth things over. She would explain him to me. She would say, "You know how he is," as if that were a full sentence, as if knowing how someone is means you have to accept everything they do. My brother Marcus is 4 years younger than me and has always been my father's favorite in the way that second children sometimes are. The one who figured out the rules, who learned to navigate the house without causing friction, who became easy where I had always been difficult. Marcus never argued at the dinner table. Marcus never asked why. I used to think he was smarter than me. Now I think he was just more willing to disappear. I left for Ohio State on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. My father thought I should stay in Dayton, attend the community college, live at home, save money. He presented this as financial wisdom. What it actually was, I understood later, was that he did not want me to leave his orbit. The moment I drove away with my car packed, I could feel something shift between us. Something that had been tense for years, finally going taut in a way that meant it would eventually snap. I called home every Sunday for the first year. My mother and I would talk for 20 or 30 minutes, and then she would hand the phone to my father, and he would ask a series of questions that were really accusations dressed up as questions. Are you being careful with your money? Are you keeping up with your coursework? Are you making the right kinds of friends? The last one was his way of asking whether I had a boyfriend he didn't know about yet, which I did. A junior named Daniel who was studying civil engineering and who made me laugh harder than anyone I had ever met. I told my parents about Daniel 6 months in on a Sunday call because I thought honesty was the right policy. My father's response was silence, followed by a request to speak to him on the phone, followed by a 40-minute conversation that Daniel described afterward as the most uncomfortable experience of my adult life. And I once had to tell a professor I plagiarized a paper. My father decided he did not approve. He did not say this directly. He never said anything directly. What he said was that Daniel seemed like someone who did not have a clear plan, and that I should be careful about attaching myself to someone without direction while I still had so much ahead of me. Daniel had a 3.8 GPA and a job offer already lined up. He had more direction than anyone I knew, but that was never the point. The point was that I had made a choice without my father's permission, and he could not accept that. The calls got shorter after that. Then they got fewer. By my junior year, I was calling every other Sunday, and by my senior year, it was once a month, and each call felt like something I had to survive rather than something I wanted to do. I graduated in May. I sent those 4 tickets. I stood alone in that parking lot. Afterward, Daniel's family took me to dinner. His mother hugged me at the restaurant and said she was proud of me, and I had to look at the ceiling for a moment to keep myself together because no one in my own family had said that word to me in longer than I could remember. I moved to Cincinnati with Daniel the following August. I got a job as a project coordinator at a mid-sized construction firm, work that turned out to suit me in ways I hadn't expected. The logistics, the problem-solving, the satisfaction of watching something get built from nothing. Daniel started his engineering job. We found a 2-bedroom apartment with a balcony that looked out over a parking garage, which sounds terrible, but we put plants out there and string lights, and it became our favorite place to sit in the evenings. For about 8 months, my family and I existed in a kind of parallel silence. I would send a text on birthdays. My mother would respond warmly. My father would not respond at all. Marcus would send a thumbs-up emoji, which I came to think of as the least amount of effort a person could make while still technically making effort. Then my father called. It was a Tuesday evening in April, and I was cooking pasta when my phone lit up with his name. I stood there for a moment watching it ring, pasta water starting to boil behind me, and then I answered because I am still, despite everything, someone who answers when her father calls. He skipped hello. He said, "Your brother is getting married in October." I said I hadn't heard that. He said Marcus had gotten engaged to a woman named Brittany. I had met her once at Christmas 2 years earlier, a perfectly nice woman who seemed slightly bewildered by our family, which I considered a sign of good judgment. I said that was wonderful and I was happy for them. Then my father said, "We need you to contribute to the wedding costs." I asked him what he meant. He explained, in the tone of someone explaining something very simple to someone very slow, that Marcus and Brittany were having a large wedding, that the costs were significant, that as family it was everyone's responsibility to contribute, and that he had a number in mind. I asked what the number was. He said $11,000. I remember that I turned off the stove. I did that automatically, the way your body keeps doing practical things while your mind goes somewhere else entirely. I turned off the stove and I sat down at the kitchen table and I looked at the wall. I said, "Dad, you didn't come to my graduation." He said that had nothing to do with this. I said, "You had 4 tickets and no one used them. Not you, not Mom, not Marcus, not Aunt Diane. I walked across that stage by myself," he said. "That's not relevant to what I'm asking. I want to tell you that I said something powerful in that moment. I want to tell you that I had the perfect words. What I actually said was nothing, for about 15 seconds, which must have made him uncomfortable because he started talking again, saying something about family obligations and what it means to show up for each other, which was so breathtakingly tone-deaf that I had to press my hand flat on the table to keep myself grounded. I said, "I'll think about it," because I did not trust myself to say anything else. I hung up and sat there until Daniel came home and found me still at the kitchen table with the uncooked pasta next to the cold pot. I told him everything. He listened the way he always listens, without interrupting, without making faces, and when I was done, he said, "What do you want to do?" Not what should you do, not what are you going to do. What do you want to do? That question, the way he asked it, is part of why I said yes when he proposed 6 months later. I thought about it for a week. I talked to a friend from college named Renata who had grown up in a similar kind of household and who had a clarity about these situations that I envied. She said, "They want you to pay for the celebration of the person they chose over you." She didn't say it cruelly. She said it the way you say something that is just true. I called my father back the following Tuesday and told him I would not be contributing $11,000 or any dollars to Marcus's wedding. I said I wished Marcus and Brittany well and I hoped they had a beautiful day, but I was not in a financial position to contribute that amount, and I also felt that the relationship between our family and me had not been the kind of relationship that made that request feel appropriate. My father's voice went flat the way it does when he is angry but has decided to be controlled about it. He said, "You're being selfish." I said, "I don't think I am." He said, "You'll regret this." I said, "Maybe." We hung up. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. And then the calls started. Not from my father at first. From my mother, who called twice asking me to reconsider, her voice carrying that particular exhaustion she gets when she is managing my father's emotions from the other side of the phone. Then from my Aunt Diane, who I was actually somewhat close to, who said she was just passing along that the family was upset and she hoped we could work it out. Then from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Brittany's mother, who had apparently been given my number and wanted to let me know how important it was for family to be united on a wedding day, which I found staggering in its lack of self-awareness. I stopped answering calls I didn't recognize. I kept my responses to my mother brief and kind and non-committal. I did not engage with the pressure because engaging with it only fed it. Then Marcus called. My brother and I had not had a real conversation in almost 2 years. I answered because I thought maybe he was calling as himself, not as an emissary. He asked how I was. I said I was fine. There were about 4 seconds of quiet, and then he said, "Claire, Dad is really upset." I said, "I know." He said, "It would mean a lot to me if you could help out." I said, "Marcus, did you know I walked across the stage at my graduation alone? 4 tickets. No one came." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That was a complicated time for the family." I asked what had been complicated about it. He didn't have a good answer. He said something about Dad's work schedule and Mom not feeling well, and I realized that he genuinely did not know how hollow those words were, that he had grown up in the same house as me and had learned the same lesson, that Dad's reasons were always sufficient, that you didn't look at them too closely. I said, "I hope you have a wonderful wedding, Marcus. I mean that." And I did mean it. I still do. None of this is really about Marcus. I hung up and called Daniel and told him I thought we should look at getting a different phone plan, something with better blocking features, and he laughed. And I laughed too, which helped. 2 weeks later, a Saturday morning in July, someone knocked on our apartment door. Daniel answered it because I was in the shower. I heard voices and then I heard him say my name, and something in his tone made me turn off the water and stand there listening. I wrapped a towel around myself and walked to the hallway. There were 2 police officers in our doorway. Not aggressive, not urgent. 2 officers from the Cincinnati PD, a man and a woman, both looking slightly uncomfortable in the way that police officers look when they've been sent on a call they already suspect is not what it was described as. The woman said, "Are you Claire Hartley?" I said I was. She said they had received a complaint that I had taken personal property belonging to my father, specifically a piece of jewelry, a gold bracelet that had belonged to my grandmother, and that he was requesting it be returned. I stood there in the hallway in a towel, dripping slightly onto the hardwood floor, and I looked at this officer and I thought very clearly, this is what he decided to do. I told her calmly that I had not taken any jewelry. I told her that I had a jewelry box in our bedroom she was welcome to look through. I told her that the last time I had been in my parents' house was Christmas 2 years ago, and I had not taken anything when I left. I told her that my father and I were in a financial disagreement about my brother's wedding, and that I believed this complaint was connected to that disagreement. She wrote things down. She looked at Daniel. Daniel, who is the steadiest person I have ever known, said, "She hasn't been to Ohio in 2 years. I can show you her work schedule if that's helpful." They did a brief walkthrough, which I consented to because I had nothing to hide. They found no bracelet. They apologized for the inconvenience and the practiced tone of people who do this often. The woman officer, as she was leaving, looked at me for just a moment longer than necessary, and I thought I saw something in her face. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. After they left, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Daniel sat next to me and didn't say anything. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn. The sound was very ordinary. I remember thinking that the world outside our apartment was completely ordinary, and inside I felt like something had been broken that would take a long time to repair. I called a lawyer that Monday, not because I thought I was in legal danger, but because I needed to understand my options, and I needed to hear someone with professional authority tell me what I already believed, that my father had filed a false police report, that this could be documented, that I had recourse if he continued. The lawyer was a woman named Patricia, who had the energy of someone who had heard this particular kind of story many times and had long since stopped being surprised by it. She told me what I needed to know. She also said, almost as an aside, that documenting everything from this point forward would be wise. I went home that evening and wrote everything down. Dates, times, the content of every call, the officers' names, the case number they had given us. I put it in a folder. I am an organized person. Organization is one of the few things I can always control. I sent my father a text that evening. I kept it short. I told him that I was aware of the police report he had filed. I told him that I had spoken to a lawyer. I told him that the bracelet he described had not been in my possession and that this could be verified. I told him that I would be blocking his number and my mother's number, and that I was asking him not to contact my workplace, my friends, or my neighbors. I told him that if he needed to reach me, he could do so through my Aunt Diane, who I trusted to communicate in good faith. Then I blocked him. I want to tell you that felt powerful. Mostly, it felt sad. There is a particular kind of sadness that comes from doing something necessary, something you know is right, something you've thought through carefully, and still feeling the loss of it. I had spent 28 years trying to be someone my father could be proud of. I had graduated college. I had built a career. I had made a good life with a good man. None of it had been enough. And I had to find a way to accept that the problem was never my efforts. It was his capacity. The months that followed were quieter. My Aunt Diane called occasionally, and I appreciated her because she never asked me to change my position. She just kept the channel open. My mother sent me a card at Christmas with a short note that said she loved me and missed me. I kept the card. I wrote back. We exist in something fragile but real. A relationship conducted through cards and occasional brief texts, carefully managed, stripped of the weight that direct contact with my father would bring. Marcus and Brittany got married in October. I sent them a card and a modest gift because I wished them well and because my conflict was not with them. Marcus sent a thank you note that was handwritten, which surprised me. He wrote that he hoped things would get better over time. I wrote back that I hoped so too. Daniel and I got engaged on a cold evening in December at a park near our apartment with no ceremony, no crowd, just the two of us and the string lights he had somehow managed to hang in a tree and a question I had already known the answer to for 2 years. We called his parents first. His mother screamed and his father said, "Well, finally." Then I called my Aunt Diane, who cried in the good way. I did not call my parents that night. I thought about them. I thought about my father's hands, which are large and rough, and how when I was very small he used to carry me on his shoulders, and I thought that was the whole world, being that high up, being held up by someone that strong. I thought about how love that starts that way, enormous, total, physical, can become something that traps you, how the same strength that carries you can hold you in place. I don't think my father is a villain. I think he is a man who never learned that love is not the same thing as control, and that the people you love most will eventually walk away if you never figure out the difference. I thought about all of that. And then Daniel and I opened a bottle of wine and sat on our balcony with the parking garage lights below us and our plants all around us, and I let myself feel, very deliberately, what it felt like to be happy. Not despite everything, not in spite of the loss, just happy, plainly, the way you are allowed to be happy when you've built something real. We set a date for the following September. I thought for a long time about whether to invite my parents. Daniel left the decision entirely to me, which was the right thing to do. My Aunt Diane, when I finally asked her opinion, said something I've thought about many times since. She said, "The question isn't whether they deserve to come. The question is whether you want them there." That distinction took me a while to understand. I had spent so long thinking about what people deserved, what I deserved, what they owed me, and she was cutting through all of that to something simpler and more honest. I decided to send my mother an invitation, not my father. My mother, separately, with a note that said I loved her and I wanted her there if she could come without it becoming something that hurt the day. I did not know if she would. I knew it was a complicated ask. She called me when she received it, the first direct call we'd had in months, and she cried for a while, and then she said she would come. She did not say anything about my father. I did not ask. 7 weeks before the wedding, my Aunt Diane called me on a Wednesday morning while I was at my desk at work. My father had had a heart attack. He was at Miami Valley Hospital in Dayton. It was serious. I drove to Dayton that evening alone because Daniel offered and I told him I needed to do this part by myself. I thought about what I was going to do for the entire 2-hour drive. The October fields, flat and brown on both sides of the highway, the sky the color of a bruise at the edges. I had not spoken to my father in over a year. I did not know what I would find when I walked into that room. I did not know who I would be when I was standing in front of him. He was smaller than I remembered. That is always the thing that surprises you, when you see a person who was enormous in your life brought down to ordinary size by a hospital bed and monitors and a gown that doesn't fit properly. He was awake. He looked at me when I walked in, and something moved across his face that I did not have a word for. Not quite surprise, not quite relief. My mother was on the other side of the bed. She reached for my hand when I came in and held it, which I let her do. I pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat down. My father looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then he looked at me. He said, "You came." I said, "You're my father." We sat there for a while without talking, the monitors doing their steady work, the hallway outside moving with its own quiet urgency. At some point, he turned his head toward me and said, "I don't know how to do this differently." It was not an apology. I want to be accurate about that. It was not a grand reckoning, not a movie moment, not the speech I had sometimes imagined in the way you imagine things you know will never happen. It was just a man telling the truth about his own limits, possibly for the first time. I said, "I know." He was in the hospital for 9 days. I came back twice more. We did not resolve everything. We did not resolve most things. But we talked, a little, in the halting way of people who have been strangers to each other and are trying, carefully, to find something to say. He asked about my job. I told him about a project I was managing. He asked if Daniel was good to me. I said yes. He nodded, and I watched something in him that had been clenched for a long time ease, very slightly, like a door that has swollen shut in the heat and finally gives. He did not come to the wedding. His doctor had advised against travel, and he was still in recovery. I don't know if he would have come, if he could have. I don't know if I would have wanted him there. What I know is that my mother came. She sat in the 3rd row on a bright September Saturday in a church in Cincinnati, and she cried through the entire ceremony, and at the reception, she danced with Daniel's father to a song neither of them knew. Laughing, and I stood across the room and watched her and thought, there she is. There is the person she is when no one is requiring something of her. I walked down the aisle by myself. It was a choice this time. Daniel had offered to have his father walk me. His mother had offered. My Aunt Diane had offered, and I said thank you, and no. I wanted to walk in on my own terms. I had done it before by necessity. I wanted to do it once by choice, to reclaim something that had been taken from me, to make that solitary walk into the thing it actually was. Not abandonment, not lack, but proof of everything I had built on my own. When I reached the end of the aisle and took Daniel's hands, he looked at me the way he always looks at me, like I am someone worth looking at. And he said quietly, "You okay?" I said, "More than." My father called the following week. It was a Sunday, which felt like something, though I couldn't say exactly what. The call was short. He said the photos my mother had shown him were beautiful. I said thank you. He said he was glad I had found someone good. I said I was too. There was a pause, and then he said to give his best to Daniel, and I said I would, and we said goodbye. It was not everything. I want to be honest about that. The way I have tried to be honest about all of it, it was not a resolution, or a redemption, or the kind of ending that makes the whole story feel clean. It was two people, father and daughter, who had hurt each other in ways that don't disappear, trying to find a small patch of ground where they could stand at the same time without making things worse. Some days that feels like enough. Some days it doesn't. What I know for certain is this. I am sitting on my balcony as I write this, with the parking garage lights below and Daniel inside making dinner, and the plants we've kept alive for 3 years all around me, and I am not waiting for anyone's permission to be here. I am not measuring my life against anyone's expectations. I crossed a stage alone at 24 and walked down an aisle alone at 29, and both times I arrived at exactly the place I was trying to go. That is the thing my father never understood about me, and maybe never will. I was never trying to escape him. I was always just trying to get somewhere.